Chapter 3.31, Part 6 of Personal Narrative of Travels to the Equinoctial Regions of America during the years 1799 to 1804, Volume 3, by Alexander von Humboldt. Translated by Thomasina Ross. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3.31, Part 6. The local authorities, or rather the rich proprietors, forming the Ayuntamiento of the Havana, the Consulado, and the Patriotic Society, have on several occasions shown a disposition favorable to the amelioration of the condition of the slaves. Note. Dicen nuestros indios del Rio Cauro, cuando se confiesan que ya entendiente que es pecado comer carne humana, pero piden que se les permita desacostumbrarse poco a poco. Quieren comer la carne humana una vez al mes, después cada 3 meses, hasta que sin sentirlo pierdan la costumbre. Cartas de los Rev. Padres Observantes, No. 7, Manuscript. Our Negroes of the River Caura say, when they confess, that they know it is sinful to eat human flesh. They beg to be permitted to break themselves of the custom little by little. They wish to eat human flesh once a month, and afterward once every 3 months, until they feel they have cured themselves of the practice. End of note. If the government of the mother country, instead of dreading the least appearance of innovation, had taken advantage of those propitious circumstances, and of the ascendancy of some men of abilities over their countrymen, the state of society would have undergone progressive changes, and in our days the inhabitants of the island of Cuba would have enjoyed some of the improvements which have been under discussion for the space of 30 years. The movement at St. Domingo in 1790, and those which took place in Jamaica in 1794, caused so great an alarm among the haciendados of the island of Cuba, that in a junta economica it was warmly debated what measure could be adopted to secure the tranquillity of the country. Regulations were made respecting the pursuit of fugitive slaves, which till then had given rise to the most revolting excesses. Note. Reglamento sobre los Negros Cimarrones to 26 de December to 1796. Before the year 1788, there were great numbers of fugitive Negroes, Cimarrones, in the mountains of Jaruco, where they were sometimes apolcandados, that is, where several of those unfortunate creatures formed small entrenchments for their common defence by heaping up trunks of trees. The Maroon Negroes, born in Africa, Bozales, are easily taken, for the greater number, in the vain hope of finding their native land, march day and night in the direction of the east. When taken, they are so exhausted by fatigue and hunger that they are only saved by giving them, during several days, very small quantities of soup. The Creole Maroon Negroes conceal themselves by day in the woods, and steal provisions during the night. Till 1790, the right of taking the fugitive Negroes belonged only to the alcalde mayor provincial, an hereditary office in the family of the Count de Pareto. At present, any of the inhabitants can seize the Maroons, and the proprietor of the slave pays 4 piastres per head, besides the food. If the name of the master is not known, the Consulado employs the Maroon Negro in the public works. This man-hunting, which at Haiti and Jamaica has given so much fatal celebrity to the dogs of Cuba, was carried on in the most cruel manner before the regulation which I have mentioned above. End of note. It was proposed to augment the number of negresses on the sugar estates, to direct more attention to the education of children, to diminish the introduction of African Negroes, to bring white planters from the Canaries and Indian planters from Mexico, to establish country schools with a view of improving the manners of the lower class, and to mitigate slavery in an indirect way. These propositions had not the desired effect. The junta opposed every system of immigration, and the majority of the proprietors, indulging their old illusions of security, would not restrain the slave trade when the high price of the produce gave a hope of extraordinary profit. It would, however, be unjust not to acknowledge in this struggle between private interests and the views of wise policy the desires and the principles manifested by some inhabitants of the island of Cuba, either in their own name or in the name of some rich and powerful corporations. The humanity of our legislation, says M. Durango nobly in a memoir written in 1796. Note. Informes sobre los negros fugitivos de 9 de junio de 1769, par Don Francisco de Arango y Pareno, oidor honorario y síndico del consulado, grants the slave 4 rights, 4 consuelos, which somewhat assuage his sufferings, and which have always been refused him by a foreign policy. These rights are the choice of a master less severe, the right of buscar amo. When a slave has found a new master who will purchase him, he may quit the master of whom he has to complain. Such is the sense and spirit of a law, beneficent, though often eluded, as are all laws that protect the slaves. In the hope of enjoying the privilege of buscar amo, the blacks often address to the travellers they meet a question, which in civilized Europe, where a vote or an opinion is sometimes solved, is more equivocally expressed. Quere vum comprarme? Will you buy me, sir? The privilege of marrying according to his own inclination. The possibility of purchasing his liberty by his labour. A slave in the Spanish colonies ought, according to law, to be estimated at the lowest price. This estimate, at the time of my journey, was, according to the locality, from 200 to 380 piastres. In 1825, the price of an adult Negro at the island of Cuba was 450 piastres. In 1788, the French trade furnished a Negro for 280 to 300 piastres. A slave among the Greeks cost 300 to 600 drachmas, 54 to 108 piastres, when the day labourer was paid 1/10 of a piastre. While the Spanish laws and institutions favour manumission in every way, the master, in the other islands, pays the fiscal, for every freed slave, 500 to 700 piastres, and of paying with an acquired property for the liberty of his wife and children. What a contrast is observable between the humanity of the most ancient Spanish laws concerning slavery and the traces of barbarism found in every page of the Black Code, and in some of the provincial laws of the English islands. The laws of Barbados, made in 1686, and those of Bermuda in 1730, decreed that the master who killed his Negro in chastising him could not even be sued, while the master who killed his slave wilfully should pay 10 pounds sterling to the royal treasury. A law of St. Christopher's of March 11th, 1784, begins with these words, whereas some persons have of late been guilty of cutting off and depriving slaves of their ears, we order that whoever shall extirpate an eye, tear out the tongue, or cut off the nose of a slave, shall pay 500 pounds sterling and be condemned to 6 months' imprisonment. It is unnecessary to add that these English laws, which were in force 30 or 40 years ago, are abolished and superseded by laws more humane. Why can I not say as much of the legislation of the French islands, where 6 young slaves suspected of an intention to escape were condemned by a sentence pronounced in 1815 to have their hamstrings cut? Notwithstanding the wisdom and mildness of Spanish legislation, to how many excesses the slave is exposed in the solitude of a plantation or a farm, where a rude capatez, armed with a cutlass, machete, and a whip, exercises absolute authority with impunity. The law neither limits the punishment of the slave nor the duration of labour, nor does it prescribe the quality and quantity of his food. A royal cedula of May 31st, 1789, had attempted to regulate the food and clothing, but that cedula was never executed. It permits the slave, it is true, to have recourse to a magistrate, in order that he may enjoin the master to be more equitable, but this recourse is nearly illusory, for there exists another law, according to which every slave may be arrested and sent back to his master, who was found without permission at the distance of 1.5 leagues from the plantation to which he belongs. How can a slave, whipped, exhausted by hunger and excess of labour, find means to appear before the magistrate? And if he did reach him, how would he be defended against a powerful master, who calls the hired accomplices of his cruelties as witnesses? In conclusion, I may quote a very remarkable extract from the Representación del Ayuntamiento, Consulado y Sociedad Patriotica, dated July 20th, 1811. In all that relates to the changes to be introduced in the captive class, there is much less question of our fears on the diminution of agricultural wealth than of the security of the whites. so easy to be compromised by imprudent measures. Besides, those who accuse the consulate and the municipality of the Havana of obstinate resistance forget that, in the year 1799, the same authorities proposed fruitlessly that the government would divert attention to the state of the blacks in the island of Cuba, del arreglo del este delicado asunto. Further, we are far from adopting the maxims which the nations of Europe, who boast of their civilization, have regarded as incontrovertible, that, for instance, without slaves there would be no colonies. We declare, on the contrary, that without slaves, and even without blacks, colonies might have existed, and that the whole difference would have been comprised in more or less profit, by the more or less rapid increase of the products. But such being our firm persuasion, we ought also to remind your Majesty that a social organization into which slavery has been introduced as an element cannot be changed with inconsiderate precipitation. We are far from denying that it was an evil contrary to all moral principles to drag slaves from one continent to another, that it was a political error not to have listened to the remonstrances of Ovando, the governor of Hispaniola, who complained of the introduction and accumulation of so many slaves in proximity with a small number of freemen. But these evils being now inveterate, we ought to avoid rendering our position and that of our slaves worse by the employment of violent means. What we ask of your Majesty is conformable to the wish proclaimed by one of the most ardent protectors of the rights of humanity, by the most determined enemy of slavery. We desire, like him, that the civil laws should deliver us at the same time from abuses and dangers." On the solution of this problem depends, in the West India Islands only, and exclusive of the Republic of Haiti, the security of 875,000 free men, whites and men of color, namely 452,000 whites, of which 342,000 are in the two Spanish islands, Cuba and Puerto Rico, and 423,000 free men of color, mulattoes and blacks, and the mitigation of the sufferings of 1,150,000 slaves. It is evident that these objects can never be attained by peaceful means, without the concurrence of the local authorities, either colonial assemblies or meetings of proprietors designated by less dreaded names, by the old parent state. The direct influence of the authorities is indispensable, and it is a fatal error to believe that we may leave it to time to act. Time will act simultaneously on the slaves, on the relations between the islands and the inhabitants of the continent, and on events which cannot be controlled, when they have been waited for with the inaction of apathy. Wherever slavery is long established, the increase of civilization solely has less influence on the treatment of slaves than many are disposed to admit. The civilization of a nation seldom extends to a greater number of individuals, and does not reach those who in the plantations are in immediate contact with the blacks. I have known very humane proprietors shrink from the difficulties that arise in the great plantations. They hesitate to disturb established order, to make innovations which, if not simultaneous, not supported by the legislation, or, which would be more powerful, by public feeling, would fail in their end, and perhaps aggravate the wretchedness of those whose sufferings they were meant to alleviate. These considerations retard the good that might be effected by men animated by the most benevolent intentions, and who deplore the barbarous institutions which have devolved to them by inheritance. They well know that to produce an essential change in the state of the slaves, to lead them progressively to the enjoyment of liberty, requires a firm will on the part of the local authorities, the concurrence of wealthy and enlightened citizens, and a general plan in which all chances of disorder and means of repression are wisely calculated. Without this community of action and effort, slavery, with its miseries and excesses, will survive as it did in ancient Rome, along with elegance of manners, progressive intelligence, and all the charms of the civilization which its presence accuses, and which it threatens to destroy, whenever the hour of vengeance shall arrive. The argument deduced from the civilization of Rome and Greece in favour of slavery is much in vogue in the West Indies, where sometimes we find it adorned with all the graces of erudition. Thus, in speeches delivered in 1795 in the Legislative Assembly of Jamaica, It was alleged that from the example of elephants having been employed in the wars of Pyrrhus and Hannibal, it could not be blamable to have brought 100 dogs and 40 hunters from the island of Cuba to hunt the Maroon Negroes. Bryan Edwards, Volume 1, page 570.) Civilization, or slow national demoralization, merely prepared the way for future events. But to produce great changes in the social state, there must be a coincidence of certain events, the period of the occurrence of which cannot be calculated. Such is the complication of human destiny, that the same cruelties which tarnish the conquest of America have been reenacted before our own eyes in times which we suppose to be characterized by vast progress, information, and general refinement of manners. Within the interval embraced by the span of one life, we have seen the reign of terror in France, the expedition to St. Domingo, the political reaction in Naples and Spain. I may also add the massacres of Chio, Ipsara, and Missolonghi, the work of the barbarians of Eastern Europe, which the civilized nations of the North and West did not deem it their duty to prevent. Note. The North American Review for 1821, number 30, contains the following passage. Conflicts with slaves fighting for their freedom are not only dreadful on account of the atrocities to which they give rise on both sides, but even after freedom has been gained, they help to confound every sentiment of justice and injustice. Some planters are condemning to death all the male Negro population above 6 years of age. They affirm that those who have not borne arms will be contaminated by the example of those who have been fighting. This merciless act is the consequence of the result of the continued misfortunes of the colonies. Schroe, Réflexions sur Saint-Dominique. In slave countries, where the effect of long habit tends to legitimize institutions the most adverse to justice, it is vain to count on the influence of information, of intellectual culture, or refinement of manners, except inasmuch as all those benefits accelerate the impulse given by governments and facilitate the execution of measures once adopted. Without the directive action of governments and legislatures, a peaceful revolution is not a thing to be hoped for. The danger becomes the more imminent when a general inquietude pervades the public mind, when amidst the political dissensions of neighbouring countries the faults and the duties of governments have been revealed. In such cases tranquillity can be restored only by a ruling authority which, in the noble consciousness of its power and right, sways events by entering itself on the career of improvement. End of chapter 3.31. Chapter 3.32, Part 1, of Personal Narrative of Travels to the Equinoctial Regions of America during the years 1799 to 1804, Volume 3, by Alexander von Humboldt. Translated by Thomasina Ross. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3.32, Part 1. Geognostic description of South America, north of the river Amazon, and east of the meridian of the Sierra Nevada de Merida. The object of this memoir is to concentrate the geological observations which I collected during my journeys among the mountains of New Andalusia and Venezuela, on the banks of the Orinoco and in the llanos of Barcelona, Calabozo, and the Apure. Consequently, from the coast of the Caribbean Sea to the valley of the Amazon, between 2 and 10.5 degrees north latitude. The extent of country which I traversed in different directions was more than 15,400 square leagues. It has already formed the subject of a geological sketch, traced hastily on the spot, after my return from the Orinoco, and published in 1801. At that period, the direction of the Cordillera on the coast of Venezuela and the existence of the Cordillera of Parima were unknown in Europe. No measure of altitude had been attempted beyond the province of Quito. No rock of South America had been named. There existed no description of the superposition of rocks in any region of the tropics. Under these circumstances, an essay tending to prove the identity of the formations of the two hemispheres could not fail to excite interest. The study of the collections which I brought back with me, and 4 years of journeying in the Andes, have enabled me to rectify my first views, and to extend an investigation which, by reason of its novelty, had been favourably received. That the most remarkable geological relations may be the more easily seized, I shall treat aphoristically in different sections, the configuration of the soil, the general division of the land, the direction and inclination of the beds, and the nature of the primitive, intermediary, secondary, and tertiary rocks. Section 1. Configuration of the country, inequalities of the soil, chains and groups of mountains, divisionary ridges, plains or llanos. South America is one of those great triangular masses which form the three continental parts of the southern hemisphere of the globe. In its exterior configuration it resembles Africa more than Australia. The southern extremities of the three continents are so placed that, in sailing from the Cape of Good Hope, latitude 33 degrees 55 minutes, to Cape Horn, latitude 55 degrees 58 minutes, and doubling the southern point of Van Diemen's Land, latitude 43 degrees 38 minutes, we see those lands stretching out toward the South Pole in proportion as we advance eastward. A fourth part of the 571,000 square sea leagues (note, almost double the extent of Europe) which South America comprises is covered with mountains distributed in chains or gathered together in groups. The other parts are plains forming long, uninterrupted bands covered with forests or gramina, flatter than in Europe, and rising progressively at the distance of 300 leagues from the coast, between 30 and 170 toises above the level of the sea. The most considerable mountainous chain in South America extends from south to north, according to the greatest dimension of the continent. It is not central, like the European chains, nor far removed from the seashore, like the Himalaya and the Hindu Kush, but is thrown towards the eastern extremity of the continent, almost on the coast of the Pacific Ocean. Referring to the profile which I have given of the configuration of South America, note, map of Colombia according to the astronomical observations of Humboldt by A.H. Brew, 1823, end of note. In the latitude of Chimborazo and Gran Para, across the plains of the Amazon, we find the land low towards the east, in an inclined plane, at an angle of less than 25 seconds, on a length of 600 leagues, and if, in the ancient state of our planet, the Atlantic Ocean, by some extraordinary cause, ever rose to 1100 feet above its present level, a height 1/3 less than the tablelands of Spain and Bavaria, the waves must, in the province of Jaen de Bracamoros, have broken upon the rocks that bound the eastern declivity of the Cordilleras of the Andes. The rising of this ridge is so inconsiderable compared to the whole continent, that its breadth in the parallel of Cape Saint Roche is 1400 times greater than the average height of the Andes. We distinguish in the mountainous part of South America a chain and three groups of mountains, namely, the Cordillera of the Andes, which the geologist may trace without interruption from Cape Pilares in the western part of the Straits of Magellan, to the promontory of Paria opposite the island of Trinidad, the insulated group of the Sierra Nevada of Santa Marta, the group of the mountains of the Orinoco or of La Parima, and that of the mountains of Brazil. The Sierra de Santa Marta being near in the meridian of the Cordilleras of Peru and New Granada, the snowy summits described by navigators in passing the mouth of the Rio Magdalena are commonly mistaken for the northern extremity of the Andes. I shall soon prove that the colossal group of the Sierra de Santa Marta is almost entirely separate from the mountains of Ocana and Pamplona, which belong to the eastern Cordillera of New Granada. The hot plains through which runs the Rio Cesar, and which extend toward the valley of Upar, separate the Sierra Nevada from the Paramo de Cacota, south of Pamplona. The ridge which divides the waters between the Gulf of Maracaibo and the Rio Magdalena is in the plain on the east of the Laguna Zapatosa. If on the one hand the Sierra de Santa Marta has been erroneously considered, on account of its eternal snow and its longitude, to be a continuation of the Cordillera of the Andes, on the other hand, the connection of that same Cordillera with the coast mountains of the provinces of Cumana and Caracas has not been recognized. The littoral chain of Venezuela, of which the different ranges form the Montana de Paria, the Isthmus of Araya, the Silla of Caracas, and the gneiss granite mountains north and south of the lake of Valencia, is joined between Puerto Cabello, San Felipe, and Tocuyo, to the Paramos de las Rosas and Niquitao, which form the northeast extremity of the Sierra de Merida and the eastern Cordillera of the Andes of New Granada. It is sufficient here to mention this connection, so important in a geological point of view, for the denominations of Andes and Cordilleras being altogether in disuse, as applied to the chains of mountains extending from the eastern Gulf of Maracaibo to the promontory of Paria, we shall continue to designate those chains, stretching from west to east, by the names of littoral chain or coast chain of Venezuela. Of the three insulated groups of mountains, that is to say, those which are not branches of the Cordillera of the Andes and its continuation toward the shore of Venezuela, one is on the north and the other two on the west of the Andes. That on the north is the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. The two others are the Sierra de la Parima, between 4 and 8 degrees of north latitude, and the mountains of Brazil, between 15 and 28 degrees south latitude. This singular distribution of great inequalities of soil produces three plains or basins, comprising a surface of 420,600 square leagues, or 4/5 of all South America east of the Andes. Between the coast chain of Venezuela and the group of the Parima, the plains of the Apure and the lower Orinoco extend. Between the group of Parima and the Brazil mountains are the plains of the Amazon, of the Rio Negro and the Madeira, and between the groups of Brazil and the southern extremity of the continent are the plains of Rio de la Plata and of Patagonia. As the group of the Parima in Spanish Guiana, and of the Brazil mountains, or of Minas Gerais and Goiás, do not join the Cordillera of the Andes of New Granada and the upper Peru towards the west, the three plains of the lower Orinoco, the Amazon, and the Rio de la Plata are connected by land straits of considerable breadth. These straits are also plains stretching from north to south, and traversed by ridges imperceptible to the eye, but forming divortia aquarum. These ridges, and this remarkable phenomenon has hitherto escaped the attention of geologists, are situated between 2 and 3 degrees north latitude and 16 and 18 degrees south latitude. The first ridge forms the partition of the waters which fall into the lower Orinoco on the northeast, and into the Rio Negro and the Amazon on the south and southeast. The second ridge divides the tributary streams of the right bank of the Amazon and the Rio de la Plata. These ridges, of which the existence is only manifested, as in Volhynia, by the course of the waters, are parallel with the coast chain of Venezuela. They present, as it were, two systems of counterslopes partially developed, in the direction from west to east, between the Guaviare and the Caqueta, and between the Mamori and the Pilcomayo. It is also worthy of remark that in the southern hemisphere the Cordillera of the Andes sends an immense counterpoise eastward in the promontory of the Sierra Nevada de Cochabamba, whence begins the ridge stretching between the tributary streams of the Madeira and the Paraguay to the lofty group of mountains of Brazil or Minas Gerais. Three transversal chains, the coast mountains of Venezuela, of the Orinoco or Parima, and the Brazil mountains, tend to join the longitudinal chain, the Andes, either by an intermediary group between the lake of Valencia and Tocuyo, or by ridges formed by the intersection of counterslopes in the plains. The two extremities of the three llanos, which communicate by land straits, the llanos of the lower Orinoco, the Amazon, and the Rio de la Plata, or of Buenos Aires, are steppes covered with gramina, while the intermediary llano, that of the Amazon, is a thick forest. With respect to the two land straits, forming bands directed from north to south, from the Apure to Caqueta, across the Provincia de los Llanos, and the sources of the Mamori and the Rio Pilcomayo, across the province of Mocos and Chiquitos, they are bare and grassy steppes like the plains of Caracas and Buenos Aires. In the immense extent of land east of the Andes, comprehending more than 480,000 square sea leagues, of which 92,000 are a mountainous tract of country, no group rises to the region of perpetual snow. None even attains the height of 1,400 toises. This lowering of the mountains in the eastern region of the new continent extends as far as 60 degrees north latitude, while in the western part, on the prolongation of the Cordillera of the Andes, the highest summits rise in Mexico, latitude 18 degrees 59 minutes to 2,770 toises, and in the Rocky Mountains, latitude 37 to 40 degrees, to 1,900 toises. The insulated group of the Alleghenies, corresponding in its eastern position and direction with the Brazil group, does not exceed 1040 toises. Note. The culminant point of the Alleghanies is Mount Washington, in New Hampshire, latitude 44 1/4 degrees. According to Captain Partridge, its height is 6,634 English feet. End of note. The lofty summits, therefore, thrice exceeding the height of Mont Blanc, belong only to the longitudinal chain which bounds the basin of the Pacific Ocean from 55 degrees south to 68 degrees north latitude, that is to say, the Cordillera of the Andes. The only insulated group that can be compared with the snowy summits of the Equinoctial Andes, and which attains the height of nearly 3,000 toises, is the Sierra de Santa Marta. It is not situated on the east of the Cordilleras, but between the prolongation of two of their branches, those of Merida and Veragua. The Cordilleras, where they bound the Caribbean Sea, in that part which we designate by the name of coast chain of Venezuela, do not attain the extraordinary height, 2,500 toises, which they reach in their prolongation towards Chita and Merida. Considering separately the groups of the east, those of the shore of Venezuela, of the Parima and Brazil, we see their height diminish from south to north. The highest summits of each group are the Silla de Caracas, 1,350 toises, and the Peak of Duida, 1,300 toises, the Itacolomi and the Itambi, 900 toises. Note. According to the measure of Messrs. Spix and Martius, the Itambi de Villa de Principe is 5,590 feet high. End of note. But as I have elsewhere observed, it would be erroneous to judge the height of a chain of mountains solely from that of the most lofty summits. The peak of the Himalayas, accurately measured, is 676 toises higher than Chimborazo. Note. The peak Lawahir, altitude 30 degrees 22 minutes 19 seconds, longitude 77 degrees 35 minutes 7 seconds, east of Paris, height 4,026 toises, according to Messrs. Hodgson and Herbert. End of note. Chimborazo is 900 toises higher than Mont Blanc, and Mont Blanc is 653 toises higher than the peak of Nethu. Note, this peak, called also the peak of Anathu or Malahita, or eastern peak of Maladetta, is the highest summit of the Pyrenees. It rises 1,787 toises, and consequently exceeds Mont Perdu by 40 toises. End of note. These differences do not furnish the relative average heights of the Himalayas, the Andes, the Alps, and the Pyrenees, that is, the height of the back of the mountains, on which arise the peaks, needles, pyramids, or rounded domes. It is that part of the back where passes are made, which furnishes a precise measure of the minimum of the height of the great chains. In comparing the whole of my measures with those of Moorcroft, Webb, Hodgson, Saussure, and Ramond, I estimate the average height of the top of the Himalayas, between the meridians of 75 and 77 degrees, at 2,400 toises, the Andes, at Peru, Quito, and New Granada, at 1,850 toises, the summits of the Alps and the Pyrenees at 1,150 toises. Note. In the passage of Quindiu, between the valley of the Magdalena and that of the Rio Cauca, I found the culminant point, La Garita del Parama, to be 1,798 toises. It is, however, regarded as one of the least elevated. The passages of the Andes of Guanacas, Guamani, and Miquipampa are respectively 2,300, 1,713, and 1,817 toises above sea level. Even in 33 degrees south latitude, the road across the Andes between Mendoza and Valparaiso is 1,987 toises high. I do not mention the Col de la Suey, where I passed near La Ladera de Cadlud, on a ridge 2,428 toises high, because it is a passage on a transverse ridge joining the two parallel chains. End of note. The difference of the mean height of the Cordilleras between 5 degrees north and 2 degrees south latitude and the Swiss Alps is consequently 200 toises less than the difference of their loftiest mountains, and in comparing the passes of the Alps, we see that their average height is nearly the same, although Peak Nethu is 600 toises lower than Mont Blanc and Mont Rosa. Between the Himalaya, note, The passes of the Himalaya that lead from Chinese Tartary into Hindustan, Nitigout, Bamsaru, etc., are from 2,400 to 2,700 toises high. End of note. And the Andes, on the contrary, considering those chains in the limits which I have just indicated, the difference between the mean height of the ridges and that of the loftiest summits presents nearly the same proportions. Taking an analogous view of the groups of mountains at the east of the Andes, we find the average height of the coast chain of Venezuela to be 750 toises, of the Sierra Parima 500 toises, and of the Brazilian group 400 toises. Whence it follows that the mountains of the eastern region of South America between the tropics are, when compared to the medium elevation of the Andes, in the relation of 1 to 3. The following is the result of some numerical statements, the comparison of which affords more precise ideas on the structure of mountains in general. Note. The calls or passes indicate the minimum of the height to which the ridge of the mountains lowers in a particular country. Now, looking at the principal passes of the Alps of Switzerland, Col Tourette, 1,191 toises, Mont Cenis, 1,060 toises, Great Saint Bernard, 1,246 toises, Simplon, 1,029 toises, and on the neck of the Pyrenees, Benasque, 1,031 toises, Penede, 1,291 toises, Gavarnie, 1,197 toises, Cavareres, 1,151 toises, it would be difficult to affirm that the Pyrenees are lower than the average height of the Swiss Alps. End of note. Table of heights of various ranges. Column 1. Names of the chains of mountains. Column 2. The highest summits in toises. Column 3. Mean height of the ridge in toises. Column 4. Proportion of the mean height of the ridges to that of the highest summits. Himalayas, between north latitude 30 degrees 18 minutes and 31 degrees 53 minutes, and longitude 75 degrees 23 minutes and 77 degrees 38 minutes. Highest summit 4,026. Mean height 2,450. Proportion 1 to 1.6. Cordillera of the Andes between latitude 5 and 2 degrees south. Highest summit 3,350. Mean height 1,850. Proportion 1 to 1.8. Alps of Switzerland. Highest summit 2,450. Mean height 1,150. Proportion 1 to 2.1. Pyrenees. Highest summit 1,787. Mean height 1,150. Proportion 1 to 1.5. Littoral chain of Venezuela. Highest peak 1,350. Mean height 750. Proportion 1 to 1.8. Group of the mountains of the Parima. Highest peak 1,300. Mean height 500. Proportion 1 to 2.6. Group of the mountains of Brazil. Highest peak 900. Mean height 500. Proportion 1 to 2.3. If we distinguish among the mountains those that rise sporadically and form small insulated systems, note, as the groups of the Canaries, the Azores, the Sandwich Islands, the Mont Doré, and the Eugenian Mountains, end of note, and those that make part of a continued chain, note, the Himalayas, the Alps, and the Andes, end of note, we find that, notwithstanding the immense height of the summits of some insulated systems, the culminant points of the whole globe belong to continuous chains, to the Cordilleras of Central Asia and South America. Note. Among the insulated systems or sporadic mountains, Moana Roa is generally regarded as the most elevated summit of the Sandwich Islands. Its height is computed at 2,500 toises, and yet at some seasons it is entirely free from snow. An exact measure of this summit, situated in very frequented latitudes, has for 25 years been desired in vain by naturalists and geologists. End of note. In that part of the Andes with which I am best acquainted, between 8 degrees south latitude and 21 degrees north latitude, all the colossal summits are of trachyte. It may almost be admitted as a general rule that whenever the mass of mountains rises in that region of the tropics much above the limit of perpetual snow, 2,300 to 2,470 toises, the rocks commonly called primitive, for instance, gneiss granite or mica slate, disappear, and the summits are of trachyte or trappean porphyry. I know only a few rare exceptions to this law, and they occur in the Cordilleras of Quito, where the Nevados of Condorrasto and Cuvian, situated opposite to the Trachytian Chimborazo, are composed of mica slate and contain veins of sulphuret of silver. Thus, in the groups of detached mountains which rise abruptly from the plains, the loftiest summits, such as Moana Roa, the peak of Teneriffe, Etna, and the peak of the Azores, present only recent volcanic rocks. It would, however, be an error to extend that law to every other continent, and to admit as a general rule that in every zone the greatest elevations have produced trachytic domes. Gneiss, granite, and mica slate constitute the summits of the ridge in the almost insulated group of the Sierra Nevada of Granada and the peak of Malhacin. Note: this peak, according to the survey of M. Clément Rojas, is 1,826 toises above the level of the sea, consequently 39 toises higher than the loftiest summit of the Pyrenees, the granitic peak of Netou, and 83 toises lower than the trachytic peak of Teneriffe. End of note. The Sierra Nevada of Granada forms a system of mountains of mica slate, passing to gneiss and clay slate, and containing shelves of euphotide and greenstone, as they also do in the continuous chain of the Alps, the Pyrenees, and probably the Himalayas. Note: if we may judge from the specimens of rocks collected in the gorges and passes of the Himalayas, or rolled down by the torrents. End of note. These phenomena, discordant in appearance, are possibly all effects of the same cause. Granite, gneiss, and all the so styled primitive Neptunian mountains may possibly owe their origin to volcanic forces, as well as the trachytes, but to forces of which the action resembles less the still burning volcanoes of our days ejecting lava, which at the moment of its eruption comes immediately into contact with the atmospheric air. But it is not here my purpose to discuss this great theoretical question. After having examined the general structure of South America, according to considerations of comparative geology, I shall proceed to notice separately the different systems of mountains and plains, the mutual connection of which has so powerful an influence on the state of industry and commerce in the nations of the new continent. I shall give only a general view of the systems situated beyond the limits of the region which forms the special object of this memoir. Geology being essentially founded on the study of the relations of juxtaposition and place, I could not treat of the littoral chain and the chain of the Parima separately, without touching on the other systems, south and west of Venezuela. End of chapter 3.32, part 1. Chapter 3.32, part 2, of Personal Narrative of Travels to the Equinoctial Regions of America, during the years 1799 to 1804, Volume 3, by Alexander von Humboldt, translated by Thomasina Ross. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3.32, part 2. A. Systems of Mountains. A1. Cordilleras of the Andes. This is the most continuous, the longest, the most uniform in its direction from south to north and north-northwest of any chain of the globe. It approaches the north and south poles at unequal distances of from 22 to 33 degrees. Its development is from 2,800 to 3,000 leagues, 20 to a degree, a length equal to a distance from Cape Finisterre in Galicia to the northeast Cape Chukchoy-Nos of Asia. Somewhat less than one half of this chain belongs to South America, and runs along its western shores. North of the Isthmus of Cupica and of Panama, after an immense lowering, it assumes the appearance of a nearly central ridge, forming a rocky dike that joins the great continent of North America to the southern continent. The lowlands on the east of the Andes of Guatemala and New Spain appear to have been overwhelmed by the ocean, and now form the bottom of the Caribbean Sea. As the continent beyond the parallel of Florida again widens toward the east, the Cordilleras of Durango and New Mexico, as well as the Rocky Mountains, merely a continuation of those Cordilleras, appear to be thrown still further westward, that is, toward the coast of the Pacific Ocean, but they still remain 8 or 10 times more remote from it than in the southern hemisphere. We may consider as the two extremities of the Andes the rock or granitic island of Diego Ramirez, south of Cape Horn, and the mountains lying at the mouth of the Mackenzie River, latitude 69 degrees, longitude 130½ degrees, more than 12 degrees west of the Greenstone Mountains, known by the name of Copper Mountains, visited by Captain Franklin. The colossal peak of St. Elias and that of Mount Fairweather in New Norfolk do not, properly speaking, belong to the northern prolongation of the Cordilleras of the Andes, but to a parallel chain, the Maritime Alps of the northwest coast, stretching toward the peninsula of California and connected by transversal ridges with the mountainous land, between 45 and 53 degrees of latitude, with the Andes of New Mexico, Rocky Mountains. In South America, the mean breadth of the Cordillera of the Andes is from 18 to 22 leagues. Note: the breadth of this immense chain is a phenomenon well worthy of attention. The Swiss Alps extend in the Grisons and in the Tyrol to a breadth of 36 and 40 leagues, both in the meridians of the lake at Como, the canton of Appenzell, and in the meridian of Bassano and Tegernsee. End of note. It is only in the knots of the mountains, that is, where the Cordillera is swelled by side groups, or divided into several chains nearly parallel and reunited at intervals, for instance, on the south of the lake of Titicaca, that it is more than 100 to 120 leagues broad, in a direction perpendicular to its axis. The Andes of South America bound the plains of the Orinoco, the Amazon, and the Rio de la Plata on the west, like a rocky wall raised across a crevice 1,300 leagues long and stretching from south to north. This upheaved part, if I may be permitted to use an expression founded on a geological hypothesis, comprises a surface of 58,900 square leagues between the parallel of Cape Pelissar and the northern Choco. To form an idea of the variety of rocks which this space may furnish for the observation of the traveller, we must recollect that the Pyrenees, according to the observations of M. Charpentier, occupy only 768 square sea leagues. The name of Andes in the Quechua language, which wants the consonants D, F, and G, Antis or Anti, appears to me to be derived from the Peruvian word anta, signifying copper or metal in general. Antachakra signifies mine of copper, Antacuri copper mixed with gold, and Puka anta copper or red metal. As the group of the Altai Mountains takes its name from the Turkish word altor or altin, note, Klaproth, Asia Polyglotta, page 211. It appears to me less probable that the tribe of the Antes gave its name to the mountains of Peru. End of note. In the same manner, the Cordilleras may have been termed copper country, or Antisuyu, on account of the abundance of that metal which the Peruvians employed for their tools. The Inca Garcilaso, who was the son of a Peruvian princess, and who wrote the history of his native country in the first years of the conquest, gives no etymology of the name of the Andes. He only opposes Antisuyu, or the region of summits covered with eternal snow, Ritiseca, to the plains or yuncas, that is, to the lower region of Peru. The etymology of the name of the largest mountain chain of the globe cannot be devoid of interest to the mineralogical geographer. The structure of the Cordillera of the Andes, that is, its division into several chains nearly parallel, which are again joined by knots of mountains, is very remarkable. On our maps this structure is indicated but imperfectly, and what La Condamine and Boucher merely guessed during their long visit to the tableland of Quito has been generalized and ill-interpreted by those who have described the whole chain according to the type of the equatorial Andes. The following is the most accurate information I could collect by my own researches and an active correspondence of 20 years with the inhabitants of Spanish America. The group of islands called Tierra del Fuego, in which the chain of the Andes begins, is a plain extending from Cape Espiritu Santo as far as the Canal of San Sebastian. The country on the west of this canal, between Cape San Valentino and Cape Pilares, is bristled with granitic mountains covered, from the Morro de San Agueda to Cabo Redondo, with calcareous shells. Navigators have greatly exaggerated the height of the mountains of Tierra del Fuego, among which there appears to be a volcano still burning. M. de Schrucke found the height of the western peak of Cape Pilares, latitude 52 degrees 45 minutes south, only 218 toises. Even Cape Horn is probably not more than 500 toises high. Note: it is very distinctly seen at a distance of 60 miles, which, without calculating the effects of terrestrial refraction, would give it a height of 498 toises. End of note. The plain extends on the northern shore of the Straits of Magellan, from the Virgin's Cape to Cabo Negro. At the latter, the Cordilleras rise abruptly, and fill the whole space as far as Cape Victoria, latitude 52 degrees 22 minutes. The region between Cape Horn and the southern extremity of the continent somewhat resembles the origin of the Pyrenees between Cape Creux, near the Gulf of Rosas, and the Col des Perdus. The height of the Patagonian chain is not known. It appears, however, that no summit south of the parallel of 48 degrees attains the elevation of the Canigou, 1,430 toises, which is near the eastern extremity of the Pyrenees. In that southern country, where the summers are so cold and short, the limit of eternal snow must lower at least as much as in the northern hemisphere, in Norway, in latitude 63 and 64 degrees, consequently below 800 toises. The great breadth, therefore, of the band of snow that envelops these Patagonian summits does not justify the idea which travellers form of their height in 40 degrees of south latitude. As we advance towards the island of Chiloe, the Cordilleras draw near the coast, and the archipelago of Chonos or Huaytecas appears like the vestiges of an immense group of mountains overwhelmed by water. Narrow estuaries fill the lower valleys of the Andes, and remind us of the fjords of Norway and Greenland. We there find, running from south to north, the Nevados de Maca, latitude 45 degrees 19 minutes, of Cuptano, latitude 44 degrees 58 minutes, of Yanteles, latitude 43 degrees 52 minutes, of Corvado, Chayapirca, latitude 42 degrees 52 minutes, and Yebian, latitude 41 degrees 49 minutes. The peak of Cuptana rises like the peak of Teneriffe from the bosom of the sea, but being scarcely visible at 36 or 40 leagues distance, it cannot be more than 1,500 toises high. Corcovado, situated on the coast of the continent, opposite the southern part of the island of Chiloe, appears to be more than 1,950 toises high. It is perhaps the loftiest summit of the whole globe, south of the parallel of 42 degrees south latitude. On the north of San Carlos de Chiloe, in the whole length of Chile to the desert of Atacama, the low western regions not having been overwhelmed by floods, the Andes there appear farther from the coast. The Abbé Molina affirms that the Cordilleras of Chile form 3 parallel chains, of which the intermediary is the most elevated. But to prove that this division is far from general, it suffices to recollect the barometric survey made by Messrs. Bauza and Espinosa in 1794 between Mendoza and Santiago de Chile. The road, leading from one of those towns to the other, rises gradually from 700 to 1,987 toises, and after passing the Col des Andes, La Combra, between the houses of refuge called Las Calaveras and Las Cuevas, it descends continually as far as the temperate valley of Santiago de Chile, of which the bottom is only 409 toises above the level of the sea. The same survey has made known the minimum height at Chile of the lower limit of snow in 33 degrees south latitude. The limit does not lower in summer to 2,000 toises. Note: on the southern declivity of the Himalayas, snow begins, 3 degrees nearer the equator, at 1,970 toises. End of note. I think we may conclude, according to the analogy of the snowy mountains of Mexico and southern Europe, and considering the difference of the summer temperature of the 2 hemispheres, that the real Nevadas at Chile, in the parallel of Valdivia, latitude 40 degrees, cannot be below 1,300 toises, at Valparaiso, latitude 33 degrees, not lower than 2,000 toises, and in that of Copiapo, latitude 27 degrees, not below 2,200 toises of height. These are the limit numbers, the minimum of elevation, which the ridge of the Andes of Chile must attain in different degrees of latitude to enable their summits to rise above the line of perpetual snow. The numerical results which I have just marked, and which are founded on the laws of distribution of heat, have still the same importance which they possessed at the time of my travels in America, for there does not exist in the immense extent of the Andes, from 8 degrees south latitude to the Straits of Magellan, one Nevada, of which the height above the sea level has been determined, either by simple geometric measure, or by the combined means of barometric and geodesic measurements. Between 33 and 18 degrees south latitude, between the parallels of Valparaiso and Arica, the Andes present toward the east 3 remarkable spurs: the Sierra de Cordova, the Sierra de Salta, and the Nevados de Cochabamba. Travellers partly cross and partly go along the side of the Sierra de Cordova, between 33 and 31 degrees of latitude, in their way from Buenos Aires to Mendoza. It may be said to be the most southern promontory which advances in the Pampas toward the meridian of 65 degrees. It gives birth to the great river known by the name of Desguadera de Mendoza, and extends from San Juan de la Frontera and San Juan de la Punta to the town of Cordova. The second spur, called the Sierra de Salta, and the Jujuy, of which the greatest breadth is 25 degrees of latitude, widens from the valley of Catamarca and San Miguel de Tucuman in the direction of the Rio Vermejo, longitude 64 degrees. Finally, the third and most majestic spur, the Sierra Nevada de Cochabamba and Santa Cruz, from 22 to 17.5 degrees of latitude, is linked with the knot of the mountains of Porco. It forms the points of partition divortia aquarum between the basin of the Amazon and that of the Rio de la Plata. The Cachimayo and the Pilcomayo, which rise between Potosi, Talavera de la Puna, and La Plata or Chuquisaca, run in the direction of southeast, while the Parapiti and the Guaypais, or Rio de Mizque, pour their waters into the Mamori to northeast. The ridge of partition being near Chayanta south of Mizque, Tomina, and Pomabamba, nearly on the southern declivity of the Sierra de Cochabamba in latitude 19 and 20 degrees, the Rio Guapay flows round the whole group before it reaches the plains of the Amazon. As in Europe, the Poprad, a tributary of the Vistula, makes a circuit in its course from the southern part of the Carpathians to the plains of Poland. I have already observed above that where the mountain cease, west of the meridian of 66.5 degrees, note, I agree with Captain Basil Hall in fixing the port of Valparaiso in 71 degrees 31 minutes west of Greenwich, and I place Cordova 8 degrees 40 minutes and Santa Cruz de la Sierra 7 degrees 4 minutes east of Valparaiso. The longitudes mentioned in the text refer always to the meridian of the Observatory of Paris. End of note. The partition ridge of Cochabamba goes up towards the northeast to 16 degrees of latitude, forming, by the intersection of 2 slightly inclined planes, only one ridge amidst the savannas, and separating the waters of the Guapore, a tributary of the Madeira, from those of the Aguapehy and Jaura, tributaries of the Rio Paraguay. This vast country between Santa Cruz de la Sierra, Villabella, and Mato Grosso is one of the least known parts of South America. The 2 spurs of Cordova and Salta present only a mountainous territory of small elevation, and linked to the foot of the Andes of Chile. Cochabamba, on the contrary, attains the limit of perpetual snow, 2,300 toises, and forms in some sort a lateral branch of the Cordilleras, diverging even from their tops between La Paz and Oruro. The mountains composing this branch, the Cordillera de Chiriguaneas, de los Soses, and Uracarias, extend regularly from west to east. Their eastern declivity is very rapid, and their loftiest summits are not in the centre but in the northern part of the group. Note. For much information concerning the Sierra de Cochabamba, I am indebted to the manuscripts of my countryman, the celebrated botanist Tadeus Henke, which a monk of the congregation of the Escurial, Father Cisneros, kindly communicated to me at Lima. Mr. Henke, after having followed the expedition of Alexander Malaspina, settled at Cochabamba in 1798. A part of the immense herbal of this botanist is now at Prague. End of note. The principal Cordillera of Chile and Upper Peru is, for the first time, ramified very distinctly into 2 branches, in the group of Porco and Potosi, between latitude 19 and 20 degrees. These 2 branches comprehend the tableland, extending from Carangas to Lamba, latitude 19 3/4 to 15 degrees, and in which is situated the small mountain lake of Paria, the Desaguadero and the great laguna of Titicaca or Chucuito, of which the western part bears the name of Vincamarca. To afford an idea of the colossal dimensions of the Andes, I may here observe that the surface of the lake of Titicaca alone, 448 square leagues, is 20 times greater than that of the lake of Geneva, and twice the average extent of a department of France. On the banks of this lake, near Tijuanacu, and in the high plains of Callao, ruins are found which bear evidence of a state of civilization anterior to that which the Peruvians assign to the reign of the Inca Manco Capac. The eastern Cordillera, that of La Paz, Palca, Ancuma, and Pelichuco, join, northwest of Apolobamba, the western Cordillera, which is the most extensive of the whole chain of the Andes, between the parallels 14 and 15 degrees. The imperial city of Cusco is situated near the eastern extremity of this knot, which comprehends in an area of 3,000 square leagues the mountains of Vilcanota, Carabaya, Abancay, Huando, Parinacochas, and Andahuaylas. Though here, as in general, in every considerable widening of the Cordillera, the grouped summits do not follow the principal axis in uniform and parallel directions, a phenomenon observable in the general disposition of the chain of the Andes from latitude 18 degrees, is well worthy of the attention of geologists. The whole mass of the Cordilleras of Chile and Upper Peru, from the Straits of Magellan to the parallel of the port of Arica, 18 degrees 28 minutes 35 seconds, runs from south to north in the direction of a meridian, at most 5 degrees northeast. But from the parallel of Arica, the coast and the two Cordilleras, east and west, of the alpine lake of Titicaca, abruptly change their direction and incline to northwest. The Cordilleras of Ancuma and Moquegua, and the longitudinal valley, or rather the basin of Titicaca, which they enclose, take a direction north 42 degrees west. Further on, the two branches again unite in the group of the mountains of Cusco, and thence their direction is north 80 degrees west. This group, of which the tableland inclines to the northeast, forms a circle, nearly from east to west, so that the part of the Andes north of Castro Virreña is thrown back more than 242,000 toises westward. This singular geological phenomenon resembles the variation of dip of the veins, and especially of the two parts of the chain of the Pyrenees, parallel to each other, and linked by an almost rectangular elbow, 16,000 toises long, near the source of the Garonne. Note. Between the mountains of Tentenada and the port d'Espot. End of note. But in the Andes, the axes of the chain, south and north of the curve, do not preserve parallelism. On the north of Castro Virreña and Andahuaylas, latitude 14 degrees, the direction is north 22 degrees west, while south of 15 degrees it is north 42 degrees west. The inflections of the coast follow these changes. The shore, separated from the Cordilleras by a plain 15 leagues in breadth, stretches from Camapo to Arica between 27.5 and 18.5 degrees of latitude, north 5 degrees east. From Arica to Pisco between 18.5 and 14 degrees latitude, at first north 42 degrees west, afterwards north 65 degrees west, and from Pisco to Trujillo between 14 and 18 degrees of latitude, north 27 degrees west. The parallelism between the coast and the Cordillera of the Andes is a phenomenon the more worthy of attention, as it occurs in several parts of the globe, where the mountains do not in the same manner form the shore. After the great knot of mountains of Cusco and Parinacochas, in 14 degrees south latitude, the Andes present a second bifurcation on the east and west of the Rio Jauja, which throws itself into the Mantaro, a tributary stream of the Apurimac. The eastern chain stretches on the east of Huanta, the convent of Opoca and Tarma; the western chain on the west of Castro Virreña, Huancavelica, Huarocheri, and Yauli. The basin, or rather the lofty tableland, which is enclosed by these chains, is nearly half the length of the basin of Chucuito or Titicaca. The two mountains covered with eternal snow, seen from the town of Lima, and which the inhabitants name Toldo de la Nieve, belong to the western chain, that of Huarocheri. Northwest of the valleys of Salcabamba, in the parallel of the ports of Huaura and Guarmi, between 11 and 10 degrees latitude, the two chains unite in the knot of the Huanuco and the Pasco, celebrated for the mines of Yauricocha or Santa Rosa. There rise two peaks of colossal height, the Nevados of Sasaguanca and of La Huida. The tableland of this knot of mountains appears in the Pambas de Bombon to be more than 1,800 toises above the level of the ocean. From this point, on the north of the parallel of Huánuco, latitude 11 degrees, the Andes are divided into three chains. The first and most eastern rises between Pozuzu and Muna, between the Rio Huallaga and the Rio Pachitea, a tributary of the Ucayali. The second, or central, is between the Huallaga and the upper Maranon. The third, or western, between the upper Maranon and the coast of Trujillo and Paita. The eastern chain is a small lateral branch, which lowers into a range of hills. Its direction is first north-northeast, bordering the Pampas del Sacramento. Afterwards, it turns west-northwest, where it is broken by the Rio Huallaga in the Pongo, above the confluence of Chipurana, and then it loses itself in latitude 6 1/4 degrees on the northwest of Lamas. A traversed ridge seems to connect it with the central chain, south of Paramo de Piscoguanca, or Piscuanunga, west of Chachapoyas. The intermediary or central chain stretches from the knot of Pasco and Huánuco towards north-northwest, between Jican and Chicoplaya, Huacurachuco, and the sources of the Rio Monzan, between Pataz and Pajatan, Cajamarquilla, and Moyobamba. It widens greatly in the parallel of Chachapoyas, and forms a mountainous territory, traversed by deep and extremely hot valleys. On the north of the Paramo de Piscoguanuna, latitude 6 degrees, the central chain throws two branches in the direction of La Vellaca and San Borja. We shall soon see that this latter branch forms, below the Rio Neva, a tributary stream of the Amazon, the rocks that border the famous Pongo de Manseriche. In this zone, where North Peru approximates to the confines of New Granada in latitude 10 and 5 degrees, no summit of the eastern and central chains rises as high as the region of perpetual snow. The only snowy summits are in the western chain. The central chain, that of the Paramos de Cayacaya and Piscoguanuna, scarcely attains 1,800 toises, and lowers gently to 800 toises, so that the mountainous and temperate tract of country, which extends on the north of Chachapoyas towards Pomacocha, La Vellaca, and the source of the Rio Nieva, is rich in fine cinchona trees. After having passed the Rio Huallaga and the Pachitea, which with the Beni forms the Ucayali, we find, in advancing toward the east, only ranges of hills. The western chain of the Andes, which is the most elevated and nearest to the coast, runs almost parallel with the shore 22 degrees west, between Cajatambo and Huari, Conchucos and Guamachuco, by Cajamarca, the Parama of Yanaguanaga, and Montan towards the Rio de Guacabamba. It comprises, between 9 and 7 1/2 degrees, the three Nevados de Pelagatos, Moyopata, and Huaylias. This last snowy summit, situated near Guamachuco in 7 degrees 55 minutes latitude, is the more remarkable, since from thence on the north as far as Chimborazo, on a length of 140 leagues, there is not one mountain that enters the region of perpetual snow. This depression or absence of snow extends in the same interval over all the lateral chains, while on the south of the Nevado de Huaylias it always happens that when one chain is very low, the summits of the other exceed the height of 2,460 toises. It was on the south of Miquipampa, latitude 7 degrees 1 minute, that I found the magnetic equator. The Amazon, or as it is customary to say in those regions, the upper Maranon, flows through the western part of the longitudinal valley lying between the Cordilleras of Chachapayas and Cajamarca. Comprehending in one point of view this valley and that of the Rio Huaja, bounded by the Cordilleras of Tarma and Huarocheri, we are inclined to consider them as one immense basin 180 leagues long, and crossed in the first third of its length by a dike, or ridge, 18,000 toises broad. In fact, the two alpine lakes of Lorichoca and Chinchaycocha, where the river Amazon and the Rio de Huaca take their rise, are situated south and north of this rocky dike, which is a prolongation of the knot of Huánuco and Pasco. The Amazon, on issuing from the longitudinal valley which bounds the chains of Cajamarca and Chachacocha, breaks the latter chain, and the point where the great river penetrates the mountains is very remarkable. Entering the Amazon by the Rio Chamaya or Guancabamba, I found opposite the confluence the picturesque mountain of Patachuana. But the rocks on both banks of the Amazon begin only between Tambillo and Tomipenda, latitude 5 degrees 31 minutes, longitude 80 degrees 56 minutes. From thence to the Pongo de Rentema, a long succession of rocks follow, of which the last is the Pongo de Teochuc, between the Strait of Manseriche and the village of San Borja. The course of the Amazon, which is first directed north, then east, changes near Puyaya, 3 leagues northeast of Tomipenda. Throughout the whole distance between Tambillo and San Borja, the waters force a way more or less narrow across the sandstones of the Cordillera of Chachapoyas. The mountains are lofty near Embarcadero, at the confluence of the Imasa, where large trees of cinchona, which might easily be transplanted to Cayenne or the Canaries, approach the Amazon. The rocks in the famous Strait of Manseriche are scarcely 40 toises high, and further eastward the last hills rise near Riberos, toward the mouth of the Rio Huallaga. End of chapter 3.32, part 2. Chapter 3.32, part 3 of Personal Narrative of Travels to the Equinoctial Regions of America during the years 1799 to 1804, Volume 3, by Alexander von Humboldt. Translated by Thomasina Ross. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3.32, Part 3. I have not yet noticed the extraordinary widening of the Andes near the Apolobamba. The sources of the Rio Beni being found in the spur which stretches northward beyond the confluence of that river with the Apurimac, I shall give to the whole group the name of the Spur of Beni. The following is the most certain information I have obtained respecting those countries, from persons who had long inhabited Apolobamba, the Real Mas Minas of Pasco, and the convent of Ocopa. Along the whole eastern chain of Titicaca, from La Paz to the knot of Huanuco, latitude 17.5 to 10.5 degrees, a very wide mountainous land is situated eastward, at the back of the declivity of the Andes. It is not a widening of the eastern chain itself, but rather of the small heights that surround the foot of the Andes like a penumbra, filling the whole space between the Beni and the Bachica. A chain of hills bounds the eastern bank of the Beni to latitude 8 degrees, for the rivers Coanachi and Magua, tributaries of the Ucayali, flowing in latitude 6 and 7 degrees, come from a mountainous tract between the Ucayali and the Yaveri. The existence of this tract in so eastern a longitude, probably longitude 74 degrees, is the more remarkable as we find at 4 degrees of latitude further north, neither a rock nor a hill on the east of Riberos, or the mouth of the Huallaga, longitude 77 degrees 56 minutes. We have just seen that the spur of Beni, a sort of lateral branch, loses itself about latitude 8 degrees. The chain between the Ucayali and the Huallaga terminates at the parallel of 7 degrees, enjoining, on the west of Lamas, the chain of Chachapoyas, stretching between the Huallaga and the Amazon. Finally, the latter chain, to which I have given the designation of central, after forming the rapids and cataracts of the Amazon, between Tomipenda and San Borja, turns to north-northwest, and joins the western chain, that of Cajamarca, or the Nevados of Pelagatos and Huaylias, and forms the great knot of the mountains of Loja. The mean height of this knot is only from 1,000 to 1,200 toises. Its mild climate renders it perpetually favourable to the growth of the cinchona trees, the finest kinds of which are found in the celebrated forest of Cajunuma and Uritusinga, between the Rio Zamora and Cachiaco, and between Tavocona and Guancabamba. Before the cinchona of Popayan and Santa Fe de Bogota, north latitude 2.5 to 5 degrees, of Huacarachuco, Huamales, and Huanuco, south latitude 9 to 11 degrees, became known, the group of the mountains of Loja had for ages been regarded as the sole region whence the febrifuge bark of cinchona could be obtained. This group occupies the vast territory between Guancabamba, Avayaca, Ona, and the ruined towns of Zamora and Loyola, between latitude 5.5 and 3.25 degrees. Some of the summits, the Paramos of Alpachaca, Saragura, Savanilla, Guaringa, Chulucanas, Guamani, and Yamoca, which I measured, rise from 1580 to 1720 toises, but are not even sporadically covered with snow, which in this latitude falls only above 1860 to 1900 toises of absolute height. Eastward, in the direction of the Rio Santiago and the Rio de Chayama, two tributary streams of the Amazon, the mountains lower rapidly. Between San Felipe, Matara, and Jaen de Bracamoros, they are not more than 500 or 300 toises. As we advance from the mica slate mountain of Loja towards the north, between the paramos of Alpachaca and Sara, in latitude 3 degrees 15 minutes, the knot of mountains ramifies into two branches which comprehend the longitudinal valley of Cuenca. This separation continues for a length of only 12 leagues, for in latitude 2 degrees 27 minutes the two Cordilleras again reunite in the knot of Assuay, a trachytic group of which the tableland near Kedlud, 2,428 toises high, nearly enters the region of perpetual snow. The group of the mountains of Assuay, which affords a very frequented pass of the Andes between Cuenca and Quito, latitude 2 1/2 to 0 degrees 40 minutes south, is succeeded by another division of the Cordilleras, celebrated by the labours of Bouguer and La Condamine, who placed their signals sometimes on one, sometimes on the other of the two chains. The eastern chain is that of Chimborazo, 3,350 toises, and Carguairazo. The western is the chain of the volcano Sangay, the Coyanes, and of Yanganate. The bottom of the longitudinal basin that bounds those two chains, from Alausi to Yactacunga, is somewhat higher than the bottom of the basin of Cuenca. North of Yactacunga, 0 degrees 40 minutes latitude, between the tops of Yiliniza, 2,717 toises, and Cotopaxi, 2,950 toises, of which the former belongs to the chain of Chimborazo, and the latter to that of Sangay, is situated the knot of Chisinche, a kind of narrow dike that closes the basin and divides the waters between the Atlantic and the Pacific. The Alto de Chisinche is only 80 toises above the surrounding tablelands. The waters of its northern declivity form the Rio de San Pedro, which, joining the Rio Pita, throws itself into the Gualabamba, or the Rio de las Esmeraldas. The waters of the southern declivity, called Cerro de Tiopuyo, run into the Rio San Felipe and the Pastaza, a tributary stream of the Amazon. The bipartition of the Cordilleras recommences and continues from 0 degrees 40 minutes latitude south to 0 degrees 20 minutes latitude north, that is, as far as the volcano of Imbabura, near the Villa of Ibarra. The eastern Cordillera presents the snowy summits of Antisana, 2,992 toises, and of Guamani, Cayambe, 3,070 toises, and of Imbabura, the western Cordillera, those of Corazon, Atacazo, Pichincha, 2,491 toises, and Cotocache, 2,570 toises. Between these two chains, which may be regarded as the classic soil of the astronomy of the 18th century, is a valley, part of which is again divided longitudinally by the hills of Ichimbio and Poignasi. The tablelands of Puembo and Chillo are situated eastward of those hills, and those of Quito, Inaquito, and Turubamba lie westward. The equator crosses the summit of the Nevado de Cayambe and the valley of Quito, in the village of San Antonio de Lulubamba. When we consider the small mass of the knot of Usui, and above all that of Chisinche, we are inclined to regard the three basins of Cuenca, Hambato, and Quito as one valley, from the Paramo de Sarar to the Villa of Ibarra, 73 leagues long, from 4 to 5 leagues broad, having a general direction north 8 degrees east, and divided by two transverse dikes, one between Alausi and Cuenca, 2 degrees 27 minutes south latitude, and the other between Machache and Timbilbo, 0 degrees 40 minutes. Nowhere in the Cordillera of the Andes are there more colossal mountains heaped together than on the east and west of this vast basin of the province of Quito, 1 degree and a half south, and 1/4 of a degree north of the equator. This basin, which, next to the basin of Titicaca, is the centre of the most ancient native civilization, touches southward the knot of the mountains of Loja, and northward the tableland of the province of Los Pastos. In this province, a little beyond the Villa of Ibarra, between the snowy summits of Cotocache and Imbabura, the two Cordilleras of Quito unite and form one mass, extending to Menzies and Voisaco, from 0 degrees 21 minutes north latitude to 1 degree 13 minutes. I call this mass, on which are situated the volcanoes of Cumbal and Chiles, the knot of the mountains of Los Pastos, from the name of the province that forms the centre. The volcano of Pasto, the last eruption of which took place in the year 1727, is on the south of Yanoy, near the northern limit of this group, of which the inhabited tablelands are more than 1,600 toises above sea level. This is the Tibet of the equinoctial regions of the New World. On the north of the town of Pasto, latitude 1 degree 13 minutes north, longitude 79 degrees 41 minutes, the Andes again divide into two branches, and surround the tableland of Mamandoy and Alguer. The eastern Cordillera contains the Cienega of Sibonboy, an alpine lake which gives birth to the Putumayo, the sources of the Jupura or Caqueta, and the Paramos of Aponte and Iscance. The western Cordillera, that of Mamaconde, called in the country Cordillera de la Costa, on account of its proximity to the shore of the Pacific, is broken by the great Rio de Peteus, which receives the Guativa, the Guachicon, and the Quilquase. The tableland or intermediary basin has great inequalities. It is partly filled by the Paramos of Pititumba and Paraguay, and the separation of the two chains appeared to me indistinct as far as the parallel of Almaguer, latitude 1 degree 54 minutes, longitude 79 degrees 15 minutes. The general direction of the Andes, from the extremity of the basin of the province of Quito to the vicinity of Popayan, changes from north 8 degrees east to north 36 degrees east, and follows the direction of the coast of Esmeralda and Barbacoas. On the parallel of Almaguer, or rather a little northeast of that town, the geological structure of the ground displays very remarkable changes. The Cordillera, to which we have given the name of Eastern, that of the lake of Sibondoy, widens considerably between Pancitara and Ceja. The knot of the Paramo de las Papas and of Socoboni gives birth to the great rivers of Cauca and Magdalena, and is divided into two chains, latitude 2 degrees 5 minutes east and west of La Plata, Vieja, and Timana. These two chains continue nearly parallel as far as 5 degrees of latitude, and they bound the longitudinal valley through which winds the Rio Magdalena. We shall give the name of the eastern Cordillera of New Granada to that chain which stretches towards Santa Fe de Bogota and the Sierra Nevada de Merida, east of Magdalena. The chain which lies between the Magdalena and the Cauca, in the direction of Mariquita, we will call the central Cordillera of New Granada, and the chain which continues the Cordillera de la Costa from the basin of Almaguer and separates the bed of the Rio Cauca from the platiniferous territory of Choco, we will designate the western Cordillera of New Granada. For additional clearness, we may also name the chain that of Sumapaz, after the colossal group of mountains on the south of Santa Fe de Bogota, which empties the waters of its eastern declivity into the Rio Meta. The second chain may bear the name of the chain of Guanacas or Quindiu, after the two celebrated passages of the Andes on the road from Santa Fe de Bogota to Popayan. The third chain may be called the chain of Choco, or of the shore, some leagues south of Popayan, latitude 2 degrees 21 minutes north, west of Paramo de Palitara and the volcano of Purachi. A ridge of mica slate runs from the knot of the mountains of Sacoboni to northwest, and divides the waters between the Pacific and the Caribbean Sea. They flow from the northern declivity into the Rio Cauca, and from the southern declivity into the Rio de Peteus. The tripartition of the Andes, north latitude 1 3/4 to 2 1/4 degrees, resembles that which takes place at the source of the Amazon in the knot of the mountains of Huanuco and Pasco, latitude 11 degrees south. But the most western of the three chains that bound the basins of the Amazon and the Huallaga is the loftiest, while that of Choco, or the shore, is the least elevated of the three chains of New Granada. Ignorance of this tripartition of the Andes in that part of South America, near the Rio Atrato in the Isthmus of Panama, has led to many erroneous opinions respecting the possibility of a canal that should connect the two seas. The eastern chain of the Andes of New Granada preserves its parallelism during some time with the two other chains, those of Quindiu and Choco, but beyond Tunja, latitude 5½ degrees, it inclines more towards the northeast, passing somewhat abruptly from the direction north 25 degrees east to that of north 45 degrees east. Note. I employ a systematic denomination, for the name of the Andes is unknown in the countries situated north of the equator. End note. It is like a vein that changes its direction, and it rejoins the coast after being greatly enlarged by the grouping of the snowy mountains of Merida. The tripartition of the Cordilleras, and above all, the spreading of their branches, have a vast influence on the prosperity of the nations of New Granada. The diversity of the superposed tablelands and climates varies the agricultural productions, as well as the character of the inhabitants. It gives activity to the exchange of productions, and renews over a vast surface, north of the equator, the picture of the sultry valleys and cool and temperate plains of Peru. It is also worthy of remark that, by the separation of one of the branches of the Cordilleras of Cundinamarca, and by the deviation of the chain of Bogota toward the northeast, the colossal group of the mountains of Merida is enclosed in the territory of the ancient Capitania General of Venezuela, and that the continuity of the same mountainous land from Pamplona to Barquisimeto in Nirgua may be said to have facilitated the political union of the Colombian territory. As long as the central chain, that of Quindu, presents its snowy summits, no peak of the eastern chain, that of La Suma Paz, rises, in the same parallels, to the limit of perpetual snow. Between latitude 2 and 5½ degrees, neither the paramos situated on the east of Gigante and Nieva, nor the tops of La Suma Paz, Chingasa, Guanchaneque, and Zoraca exceed the height of 1900 to 2000 toises, while on the north of the parallel of Paramo d'Evra, latitude 5 degrees 5 minutes, the last of the nevados of the central Cordillera, we discover in the eastern chain the snowy summits of Chita, latitude 5 degrees 50 minutes, and of Mochuchis, latitude 8 degrees 12 minutes. Hence it results that from latitude 5 degrees, the only mountains covered with snow during the whole period of the year are the Cordilleras of the east. And although the Sierra Nevada of Santa Marta is not, properly speaking, a continuation of the nevados of Chita and Mucuchis, west of Patute and east of Merida, it is at least very near their meridian. Having now arrived at the northern extremity of the Cordilleras, comprehended between Cape Horn and the Isthmus of Panama, we shall proceed to notice the loftiest summits of the three chains which separate in the knot of the mountains of Socoboni and the ridge of Roble, latitude 1 degree 50 minutes to 2 degrees 20 minutes. I begin with the most eastern chain, that of Timana and Suma Paz, which divides the tributary streams of the Magdalena and the Meta. It runs by the Paramos de Chingasu, Guachaneque, Zoraca, Toquillo, near Labranza Grande, Chita, Almorsadero, Laura, Cacota, Zumbador, and Poqueras, in the direction of the Sierra Nevada de Merida. These paramos indicate 10 partial risings of the back of the Cordilleras. The declivity of the eastern chain is extremely rapid on the eastern side, where it bounds the basin of the Meta and the Orinoco. It is widened on the west by the spurs on which are situated the towns of Santa Fe de Bogota, Tunja, Sogamoso, and Leiva. They are like tablelands fixed to the western declivity, and are from 1300 to 1400 toises high. That of Bogota, the bottom of an ancient lake, contains fossil bones of the mastodon in the plain called, from them, the Campo de Gigantes, near Suacha. The intermediary or central chain runs east of Popayan by the high plains of Mabasa, the paramos of Guanacas, Huila, Savalillo, Iraca, Paraguan, Tolima, Ruiz, and Herveo, towards the province of Antioquia. In 5 degrees 15 minutes of latitude, this chain, the only one that shows traces of recent volcanic fire, in the summits of Sotara and Purace, widens considerably toward the west, and joins the western chain, which we have called the chain of Choco, because the platiniferous land of that province lies on the slope opposite the Pacific Ocean. By the union of the two chains, the basin of the province of Popayan is close on the north of Cartago Viejo, and the river of Cauca, issuing from the plain of Buga, is forced from the Salto de San Antonio to La Boca del Espiritu Santo, to open its way across the mountains along a course of from 40 to 50 leagues. The difference of level is very remarkable in the bottom of the two parallel basins of Cauca and Magdalena. The former, between Cali and Cantago, is from 500 to 404 toises. The latter, from Nieva to Ambalema, is from 265 to 150 toises high. According to different geological hypotheses, it may be said either that the secondary formations have not accumulated to the same thickness between the eastern and central as between the central and western chains, or that the deposits have been made on the base of primitive rocks, unequally upheaved on the east and west of the Andes of Quindiu. The average difference of the thickness of these formations is 300 toises. The rocky ridge of Angostura de Harari branches from the southeast from the spur of Muzo, through which winds the Rio Negro. By this spur, and by those that come from the west, the eastern and central chains approach between Neres, Honda, and Mendales. In fact, the bed of the Rio Magdalena is narrowed in 5 and 5 degrees 18 minutes on the east by the mountains of Sargento, and on the west by the spurs that are linked with the granitic mountains of Maraquito and Santa Ana. This narrowing of the bed of the river is in the same parallel with that of the Cauca, near the Salto de San Antonio, but in the knot of the mountains of Antioquia, the central and western chains join each other, while between Honda and Mendales, the tops of the central and eastern chains are so far removed that it is only the spurs of each system that draw near and are confounded together. It is also worthy of remark that the central Cordillera of New Granada displays the loftiest summit of the Andes in the northern hemisphere. The peak of Tolima, latitude 4 degrees 46 minutes, which is almost unknown even by name in Europe, and which I measured in 1801, is at least 2,865 toises high. It consequently surpasses Imbabura and Cotocache in the province of Quito, the Chiles of the tablelands of Los Pastos, the two volcanoes of Popayan, and even the Nevados of Mexico and Mount St. Elias of Russian America. The peak of Tolima, which in form resembles Cotopaxi, is perhaps inferior in height only to the ridge of the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, which may be considered as an insulated system of mountains. End of section 3.32, part 3. Chapter 3.32, part 4, of personal narrative of travels to the equinoctial regions of America during the years 1799 to 1804, volume 3, by Alexander von Humboldt, translated by Thomasina Ross. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3.32, part 4. The eastern chain, also called the chain of Choco and the east coast of the Pacific, separates the provinces of Popayan and Antioquia from those of Barbacoas, Raposo, and Choco. It is in general but little elevated compared to the height of the central and eastern chains. It, however, presents great obstacles to the communications between the valley of Cauca and the shore. On its western slope lies the famous auriferous and platiniferous land, which has, during ages, yielded more than 13,000 marks of gold annually. Note: Choco, Barbacoas, and Brazil are the only countries in which the existence of grains of platinum and palladium has hitherto been fully ascertained. The small town of Barbacoas is situated on the left bank of the Rio Telembi, a tributary of Peteus, or the Rio del Castigo, a little above the confluence of Telembi and the Guagi or Guaji, nearly in latitude 1 degree 48 minutes. The ancient provincia, or rather the Partido del Raposo, comprehends the insalubrious land extending from the Rio d'Agua or San Buenaventura to the Rio Escuande, the southern limit of Choco. End of note. This alluvial zone is from 10 to 12 leagues broad. Its maximum of productiveness lies between the parallels of 2 and 6 degrees latitude. It sensibly impoverishes toward the north and south, and almost entirely disappears between 1 and 1/4 degree north latitude and the equator. The auriferous soil fills the basin of Cauca, as well as the ravines and plains west of the Cordillera of Choco. It rises sometimes nearly 600 toises above the level of the sea, and descends at least 40 toises. Note: M. Caldas assigned to the upper limit of the zone of gold washings only the height of 350 toises. Seminaria, tome 1, page 18. But I found the Serraderos of Quilichao on the north of Popayan to be 565 toises high.) Platinum, and this fact is worthy of attention, has hitherto been found only on the west of the Cordillera of Choco, and not on the east, notwithstanding the analogy of the fragments of rocks of greenstone, phonolite, trachyte, and ferruginous quartz, of which the soil of the two slopes is composed. From the ridge of Los Robos, which separates the tableland of Almaguer from the basin of Cauca, the western chain forms, first, in the Cerros de Carpinteria, east of Rio San Juan de Miquel, the continuation of the Cordillera of Sindagua, broken by the Rio Peteus, then, lowering northward between Cali and Las Juntas de Dagua, at the elevation of 800 to 900 toises, it sends out considerable spurs, latitude 4 1/4 to 5 degrees, towards the source of the Calima, the Tamana, and the Andagueda. The two former of these auriferous rivers are tributary streams of the Rio San Juan del Choco. The second empties its waters into the Atrato. This widening of the western chain forms the mountainous parts of Choco. Here, between the Tado and Zitara, called also Francisco de Quibdo, lies the isthmus of Raspadura, across which a monk traced a navigable line of communication between the two oceans. The culminant point of this system of mountains appears to be the peak of Tora, situated southeast of Novita. The northern extremity of this enlargement of the Cordillera of Choco, which I have just described, corresponds with the junction formed on the east between the same Cordillera and the central chain, that of Quindiu. The mountains of Antioquia, on which we have the excellent observations of Mr. Restrepo, may be called a knot of mountains, and on the northern limit of the plains of Buga, or the basin of Cauca, they join the central and western chains. The ridge of the eastern Cordillera is at the distance of 35 leagues from this knot, so that the contraction of the bed of the Rio Magdalena between Honda and Ambalema is caused only by the approximation of the spurs of Mariquita and Crawdads. There is not, therefore, properly speaking, a group of mountains between latitude 5 and 5 1/4 degrees, uniting the three chains at once. In the group of the province of Antioquia, which forms the junction of the central and western Cordilleras, we may distinguish two great masses, one between the Magdalena and the Cauca, and the other between the Cauca and the Atrato. The first of these masses, which is linked most immediately to the snowy summits of Herveo, gives birth on the east to the Rio de la Miel and the Nare, and on the north to Porce and Nechi. Its average height is only from 1200 to 1350 toises. The culminant point appears to be near Santa Rosa, southwest of the celebrated Valley of Bears, Valle de Osos. The towns of Rio Negro and Maranilla are built on the tablelands 1060 toises high. The western mass of the knot of the mountains of Antioquia, between the Cauca and the Atrato, gives rise on its western descent to the Rio San Juan, Bavara, and Muri. It attains its greatest height in the Alto de Viento, north of Urao, known to the first conquistadors by the name of the Cordilleras of Abide or Dabida. This height, latitude 7 degrees 15 minutes, does not, however, exceed 1500 toises. Following the western slope of this system of mountains of Antioquia, we find that the point of partition of the waters that flow toward the Pacific and the Caribbean Sea, latitude 5 1/2 and 6 degrees, nearly corresponds with the parallel of the isthmus of Raspadura, between the Rio San Juan and the Atrato. It is remarkable that in this group, more than 30 leagues broad, without sharp summits, between latitude 5 1/4 and 7 degrees, the highest masses rise towards the west, while further south, before the union of the two chains of Quindiu and Choco, we saw them on the east of Cauca. The ramifications of the knot of Antioquia, on the north of the parallel 7 degrees, are very imperfectly known. It is observed only that their lowering is in general more rapid and complete toward the northwest, in the direction of the ancient province of Biriquete and Darien, than towards the north and northeast, on the side of Zaragoza and Simiti. From the northern bank of the Rio Nare, near its confluence with the Samana, a spur stretches out, known by the name of La Cimitara and the mountains of San Lucar. We may call it the first branch of the group of Antioquia. I saw it in going up the Rio Magdalena on the west, from the Regidor and the mouth of the Rio Simiti as far as San Bartolome on the south of the mouth of the Rio Sagamoso, while eastward, in latitude 7 3/4 and 4 1/4 degrees, the spur of the mountains of Ocana appear in the distance. They are inhabited by some tribes of Molitoni Indians. The second branch of the group of Antioquia, west of Cimitara, commences at the mountains of Santa Rosa, stretches out between Zaragoza and Caceres, and terminates abruptly at the confluence of the Rio Nechi, latitude 8 degrees 33 minutes. At least if the hills, often conical, between the mouth of the Rio Sinu and the small town of Tolo, or even the calcareous heights of Turbaco and Popa near Cartagena, may not be regarded as the most northern prolongation of this second branch. A third advances toward the Gulf of Uraba or Darien, between the Rio San Jorge and the Atrato. It is linked southward with the Alto de Viento, or Sierra de Abide, and is rapidly lost, advancing as far as the parallel of 8 degrees. Finally, the fourth branch of the Andes of Antioquia, situated westward of Zitara and the Rio Atrato, undergoes, long before it enters the Isthmus of Panama, such a depression that between the Gulf of Cupica and the embarcadero of the Rio Napipi, we find only a plain across which M. Gougenech has projected a canal for the junction of the two seas. It would be interesting to know the configuration of the strata between Cape Garachin, or the Gulf of San Miguel, and Cape Tiburon, especially toward the source of the Rio Toira and Chacunaque or Chacunque, so as to determine with precision where the mountains of the Isthmus of Panama begin to rise, mountains whose elevation does not appear to be more than 100 toises. The interior of Darfur is not more unknown to geographers than the humid insalubrious forest land which extends on the northwest of Betoy and the confluence of the Bavara and the Atrato toward the Isthmus of Panama. All that we positively know of it hitherto is that between Cupica and the left bank of the Atrato there is either a land strait or a total absence of the Cordillera. The mountains of the Isthmus of Panama, by their direction and their geographical position, may be considered as a continuation of the mountains of Antioquia and Choco, but on the west of Bas Atrato there is scarcely a ridge in the plain. We do not find in this country a group of interposed mountains like that which links, between Barquisimeto, Nirgua, and Valencia, the eastern chain of New Granada, that of Sumapaz and the Sierra Nevada de Merida, to the Cordillera of the shore of Venezuela. The Cordillera of the Andes, considered in its whole extent, from the rocky wall of the island of Diego Ramirez to the Isthmus of Panama, is sometimes ramified into chains more or less parallel, and sometimes articulated by immense knots of mountains. We distinguish 9 of those knots, and consequently an equal number of branching points and ramifications. The latter are generally bifurcations. The Andes are twice only divided into 3 chains, in the knot of Huanco, near the source of the Amazon, and the Huallaga, latitude 10 to 11 degrees, and in the knot of the Paramo de las Papas, latitude 2 degrees, near the source of the Magdalena and the Cauca. Basins almost shut in their extremities, parallel with the axis of the Cordillera and bounded by 2 knots and 2 lateral chains, are characteristic features of the structure of the Andes. Among these knots of mountains, some, for instance those of Cusco, Loja, and Los Pastos, comprise 3,300, 1,500, and 1,130 square leagues, while others no less important in the eye of the geologist are confined to ridges or transversal dikes. To the latter belong the Altos de Chisinche, latitude 0 degrees 40 minutes south, and the Los Robles, latitude 2 degrees 20 minutes north, on the south of Quito and Popayan. The knot of Cusco, so celebrated in the annals of Peruvian civilization, presents an average height of from 1,200 to 1,400 toises, and a surface nearly 3 times greater than the whole of Switzerland. The ridge of Chisinche, which separates the basins of Tacunga and Quito, is 1,580 toises high, but scarcely a mile broad. The knots or groups which unite several partial chains have not the highest summits, either in the Andes or, for the most part, in the great mountain ranges of the old continent. It is not even certain that there is always in those knots a widening of the chain. The greatness of the mass and the height so long attributed to points whence several considerable branches issue was founded either on theoretical ideas or on false measures. The Cordilleras were compared to rivers that swell as they receive a number of tributary streams. Among the basins which the Andes present, and which form probably as many lakes or small inland seas, those of Titicaca, Rio Huaja, and the Upper Maroon comprise respectively 3,500, 1,300, and 2,400 square leagues of surface. Note. I here subjoin some measures interesting to geologists. Area of the Andes, from Tierra del Fuego to the Paramo de las Rosas, latitude 4 1/4 degrees north, where the mountainous land of Tocuyo and Barquisimeto begins, part of the Cordillera of the shore of Venezuela, 58,900 square leagues, 20 to a degree. The four spurs of Cordova, Salta, Cochabamba, and Beni alone occupy 23,300 square leagues of this surface, and the three basins containing between latitude 6 and 20 degrees south measure 7,200 square leagues. Deducting 33,200 square leagues for the whole of the enclosed basins and spurs, we find, in latitude 65 degrees, the area of the Cordilleras elevated in the form of walls to be 25,700 square leagues, whence results, comprehending the knots and allowing for the inflection of the chains, an average breadth of the Andes of 18 to 20 leagues. The valleys of Huallaga and the Rio Magdalena are not comprehended in these 58,900 square leagues, on account of the diverging direction of the chain, east of Cipo Playa and Santa Fe de Bogota. End of note. The first is so encompassed that no drop of water can escape except by evaporation. It is like the enclosed Valley of Mexico. Note. We consider it in its primitive state, without respect to the gap or cleft of the mountains known by the name of Desagua de Huehuetoca. End of note. And of those numerous circular basins which have been discerned in the moon, and which are surrounded by lofty mountains. An immense alpine lake characterizes the base of Tijuanaco or Titicaca. This phenomenon is the more worthy of attention, as in South America there are scarcely any of those reservoirs of fresh water which are found at the foot of the European Alps, on the northern and southern slopes, and which are permanent during the season of drought. The other basins of the Andes, for instance those of Huaja, the Upper Maroon, and Cauca, pour their waters into natural canals, which may be considered as so many crevices situated either at one of the extremities of the basin or on its banks, nearly in the middle of the lateral chain. I dwell on this articulated form of the Andes, on those knots or transverse ridges, because, in the continuation of the Andes called the Cordilleras of the shore of Venezuela, we shall find the same transverse dikes and the same phenomena. The ramification of the Andes, and of all the great masses of mountains, into several chains, merits particular consideration in reference to the height more or less considerable of the bottom of the enclosed basins or longitudinal valleys. Geologists have hitherto directed more attention to the successive narrowing of these basins, their depth compared with the walls of rock that surround them, and the correspondence between the re-entering and the salient angles, than to the level of the bottom of the valleys. No precise measure has yet fixed the absolute height of the three basins of Titicaca, Huaja, and the Upper Maroon. Note. I am inclined to believe that the southern part of the basin of the Upper Maroon, between Huari and Huacarachuco, exceeds 350 toises. End of note. But I was fortunate enough to be able to determine the 6 other basins, or longitudinal valleys, which succeed each other as if by steps toward the north. The bottom of the valley of Cuenca, between the knots of Loja and Asue, is 1,350 toises. The valley of Ayansi and of Hambato, between the knot of the Asue and the ridge of Chisinche, 1,320 toises. The valley of Quito in the eastern part, 1,340 toises, and in the western part, 1,490 toises. The basin of Almaguer, 1,160 toises. The basin of the Rio Cauca, between the lofty plains of Cali, Buga, and Cartago, 500 toises. The valley of Magdalena, first between Nieva and Honda, 200 toises, and further on, between Honda and Mopos, 100 toises of average height above the level of the sea. Note. In the region of the Andes, comprehended between 4 degrees of south latitude and 2 degrees of north, the longitudinal valleys or basins enclosed by parallel chains are regularly between 1,200 and 1,500 toises high, while the transversal valleys are remarkable for their depression, or rather the rapid lowering of their bottom. The Valley of Peteus, for instance, running from northeast to southwest, is only 350 toises of absolute height, even above the junction of the Rio Guachion and the Quilquasi, according to the barometric measures of M. Caldas, and yet it is surrounded by the highest summits, the Paramas de Punta Urco and Mamacondi. Going from the plains of Lombardy and penetrating into the Alps of the Tyrol, by a line perpendicular to the axis of the chain, we advance more than 20 marine leagues toward the south, yet we find the bottom of the valley of the Adige and Eysack near Boston to be only 182 toises of absolute height, an elevation which exceeds but 117 toises that of Milan. From Boston, however, to the ridge of Brenner, culminant point 746 toises, is only 11 leagues. The Valais is a longitudinal valley, and in a barometric measurement which I have made very recently, from Paris to Naples to Berlin, I was surprised that from Sion to Brig, the bottom of the valley rises only to from 225 to 350 toises of absolute height, nearly the level of the plains of Switzerland, which, between the Alps and the Jura, are only from 274 to 300 toises. End of note. In this region, which has been carefully measured, the different basins lower very sensibly from the equator northward. The elevation of the bottom of enclosed basins merits great attention in connection with the causes of the formation of the valleys. I do not deny that the depressions in the plains may be sometimes the effect of ancient pelagic currents, or slow erosions. I am inclined to believe that the transversal valleys, resembling crevices, have been widened by running waters, but these hypotheses of successive erosions cannot well be applied to the completely enclosed basins of Titicaca and Mexico. These basins, as well as those of Jauja, Cuenca, and Almaguer, which lose their waters only by a lateral and narrow issue, owe their origin to a cause more instantaneous, more closely linked with the upheaval of the whole chain. It may be said that the phenomenon of the narrow declivities of the Serrental and of the valley of Eysack in the Tyrol is repeated at every step, and on a grander scale, in the Cordilleras of Equinoctial America. We seem to recognize in the Cordilleras those longitudinal sinkings, those rocky vaults, which, to use the expression of a great geologist, are broken when extended over a great space, and leave deep and almost perpendicular rents. Note: Von Buch, Tableau du Tyrol Meridional, page 8, 1823. End of note. End of chapter 3.32, part 4.